everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Attachment Theory in Action. I, as always, am very excited for my guest today. We're going to be diving into a topic that doesn't really get much attention, at least out there in the public. Maybe if you're working in the field of attachment, you've done some diving into this area, but either way, I'm very excited. I think that this is going to be something that gets your wheels turning and makes you want to ask more questions. So I'm very pleased to welcome Jessica Setnick to the podcast. Jessica started her career as a dietitian helping children with eating disorders. Then she realized that all the skills she was teaching those kids and their parents apply to everyone who eats. Her mission is now healing your inner eater, a workshop and workbook to help anyone with a conflicted relationship with food take the shame and blame away and figure out why we do the things that we don't want to do. Hi, Jessica. I am so excited to have you on our podcast today. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
We can be diving into a topic that I feel is not it's not really in public conversation about attachment theory, right? Um, I think we have conversations about eating disorders in therapy. And I think some of us who are really in the deeper field of attachment theory work may talk about eating behaviors or uh, kind of more problematic behaviors, especially in our children and young people as it pertains to food. But I feel like there's not a whole lot of open out there conversation about eating and attachment and trauma and all those
You
pieces.
know what? It's the same in my field, which is the field of nutrition and mental health and eating disorders. That aspect, we don't talk about it, but what could be more crucial to your experience of attachment than being fed? I mean, it's how we
Mm,
develop self-esteem as infants. If you think about infant feeding and having someone holding you, looking into your eyes, or not, right? If they're
hmm
neglectful or if they're mentally altered due to chemicals or depression or anxiety, right? So there's so much about that early infant feeding that leads to lifelong attachment issues, whether they are expressed later in food or in something else. It's just
hmm
it's an amazing connection, and I love that we're talking about it today.
Me too, me too. Well, we will dive into that in just a little bit, but I always start the podcast with the same question for all of my guests, and that really is, was there anything early on in your life that you could kind of pinpoint or think about, or even maybe early in your career that has kind of led you down the path that you're on and into the world of eating and mental health and so on. So tell us a bit about your story.
Sure. So the way I got into the field is that I was an anthropology major in college only because I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. And so I took the classes that were interesting to me. And if anyone listening doesn't know what anthropology is, I didn't either until I was doing it. It's just the study of human development, right? So cultural development, physical development, interpersonal development. It's just the study of human development. And so what fascinated me about it was that basically the choices that we think we're making every day when we wake up, a lot of them were actually planned for us in the sense of
Mm.
the way our culture raised us, and we don't realize it. So, just as an example to apply it to nutrition, think about what we consider food. Like everyone thinks we woke up in the morning and made our own choices about what to eat. I have a cough coming. Will you be able to edit this out?
It's okay. It's all good. We
Okay.
we are all real here,
Oh,
so
okay.
no
Okay.
worries at all.
Great. Thank you. So, but you're really not the person, the architect of those choices. If you think about, it has to do with what is in the stores in your area. What
Mm,
even do you consider food? Is a grasshopper food? Is a grasshopper not food? Right? There's so many cultural influences and other influences. And so I love that about anthropology, and how it applied to nutrition too. I took a nutrition class as an elective, and in my mind, I sort of combined the two into like, how do you make the choices you make about eating? How do you feel about the foods before you eat, after you eat? Do you
mhm.
regret those kind of things? And so I got my degree in anthropology and then went on to have a master's degree in sports nutrition. And while I was in my nutrition master's, what I realized was that part of nutrition that I loved, sort of the what is the psychological aspects, what are the cultural
Mm,
aspects, even though I feel like that should be important in every area of nutrition, at least human nutrition, it was really only kosher to talk about that stuff in the eating disorder field. So I was
mm,
drawn to the eating disorder area of nutrition because that was where we got to talk about those experiences of eating, not just the molecules and milligrams and things
mm,
like that. When I saw your question, um, I started thinking, well, how does this relate to me, my earlier life? Like, how can I pinpoint, you know, how did this all come together? And I remember thinking at some point, in my early career, it hit me like this bolt out of the blue, this realization that my mom was a biology major and became a librarian. My dad was an engineer, super duper smart, got his GED in his 20s. He had dropped out of high school, got his GED, went to get an MBA eventually at MIT. Like these two super smart people in different areas, and I suddenly realized that the field I chose brought it all together, right?
mm,
The research aspect of the librarian, the nutrition aspect of the biologist, the business aspect of running my own business, and the sort of engineer sort of way of thinking about sort of reverse engineering things to figure out how they work. It was kind of an amazing thought. And then today I was thinking, okay, keep going even earlier. Like what draws your attention? And I thought of this incident when I was in kindergarten where I told my mom I had a stomach ache, and she told my kindergarten teacher, Jessica says she has a tummy ache, but her grandparents came to visit and they left today, and I think she's just feeling sad. And so my
mm.
kindergarten teacher sat me in her lap when we sat in our big circle at the beginning of the day, where I promptly threw up all over her. And so I I'm thinking like, wow, what a combination of like feelings and food and eating and distress, and my grandparents, there was the attachment. I mean, it just,
Mm,
and I sort of think, okay, so I've always been a person whose feelings affect me somatically. I've always been a person who maybe grew up in a family where sometimes your experience was a little bit discounted, your experience of your own body, right? So I feel like that moment, and I heard that story so many times in my life of how I just immediately threw up on my kindergarten teacher. I feel like my mom had carried the guilt feeling of not really believing me when I said I didn't feel well. Maybe she was a more of an emotional somatic person too, and so she was projecting her experience onto me. So
mhm.
I feel like there's probably a million incidents like that that all kind of built me into the person I am today, just like everyone. But it was a really interesting experience. Oh no. Okay, I'm a real person and I forgot to turn my phone off.
You're
Sorry.
okay. It's all good. It's
reality
all good.
reality intrudes, and it turns out I'm imperfect but a recovering perfectionist, so I'm going to give myself grace, take a deep breath, keep
It's
going.
all good. So, you know what I love about what you were just describing is your 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 story kind of came full circle because then you fell into or you moved into this academia field of anthropology, which talks about how everything kind of shapes who we are and how
Yes.
we end up being. And I think we don't pay enough attention to food and as you've mentioned, like our relationships with food, how we feel about food, but it plays such a big role in our life and our early life
Oh, yeah. Oh,
experiences.
yeah. I once gave a talk to a group of individuals who had had weight loss surgery. They had invited me to come speak, and I was just sort of talking about the things I always talk about. And at some point, I noticed everyone is like furiously writing on their notepads, and I paused and I said, "What did I say?" I've noticed everyone is writing something down, but I I don't remember having sort of a mic drop moment. What did I say that everyone's writing down? And one of them said, "You said something about your relationship with food. I've never heard anyone talk about your relationship with food." And I thought, something is so wrong here because you're talking about people who have had such a distorted relationship with food that
Mm-hmm.
they got all the way to the point of needing to have weight loss surgery. And no one in their lives has ever had this conversation with them. This is
Mm-hmm.
a really kind of messed up world we live in where these things aren't discussed. So I agree with you. There's not enough attention on it. We talk all the time about what nutrients you're going to eat. I mean, look at the new food tornado that came out, you know, but the molecules of what you're going to eat, but nobody talks about, do you even have access to enough molecules? Do you even have enough
Mm-hmm.
money to buy the molecules? Do you have transportation to get the molecules? Do you have a place to store the molecules safely in your home free from pests? There's so many
Mm-hmm.
aspects besides just nutrients. And so, yes, I agree. There is not enough focus on that.
Mm-hmm. So um let's dive, I want to dive a little bit deeper into, we began our conversation talking about, the infant experience
Yeah.
of food and being fed. Um just sh share your thoughts, like when those things come into your mind, what are you thinking about?
Sure. So I teach a workshop called Healing Your Inner Eater, and we talk about the very earliest experience and memories that people have about food and eating because they are very much tied into the development of self-esteem and your understanding of your own internal cues, your interoception, if you're familiar with that word. Probably most people listening are, but most people I speak with in the community are not familiar with that word at all, right? Your experience of
Hmm.
what you feel inside. And so we talk about just even imagining the experience of being held as an infant and fed either with a bottle or breast. And what is the experience of the infant? Because at that developmental stage, my understanding is that the infant doesn't even realize that they are necessarily their own person. They're part
Hmm.
of the
Hmm.
experience, let's say, totally nonverbal, of course. And so the experience of the infant is if the person that is feeding them is nurturing and saying ridiculous things like, "You're the cutest baby ever," la, 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 and the smiling of their eyes and the smiling of their face,
Hmm.
that those are messages that the infant interprets as non-verbally. I am good. I am part of something good. I make people feel good. And that then helps
Hmm.
develop the self-esteem. And so, if there is a crisis of some kind where, for example, a baby is left with a pillow propped up and a bottle and no one is there when they're feeding, or if the person feeding them is distracted and isn't attuned to when they're ready to be finished and continues to feed
Hmm.
them, or the opposite decides this baby's had enough when the baby has not
Hmm.
had enough, or is in a bad mood, or is angry with the baby, or resentful of the baby, that the vibes, for lack of a better word, that the baby ingests along with the nutrients are negative. I'm not good enough. I make people unhappy. Again, all nonverbal, but that you
Hmm.
can start to equate the feeding experience with negative. If there's punishment around food, if we go a little bit older than infancy, but I'm thinking of my husband who had to sit at the table overnight because he didn't want to eat his mashed
Oh,
potatoes,
wow.
right? If you have those experiences, then you start to equate food with negative feelings, negative physical feelings. If you're forced to eat something that doesn't taste good to you or that makes you feel sick, there's all kinds of ways that we then link consciously or unconsciously, verbally or non-verbally, link those bad experiences to
Hmm.
either individual foods or eating in general. And I mean, I hate to use this term because I'm not a fan of the person who coined it, but I'll use it anyway because it's just sort of become a meme. But the body keeps the score, people. I
Right.
mean, right? So those early experiences can really be reflected in later, whether it's eating issues or whether it's relationship issues or something else. We hang on to that stuff unless we bring it into our consciousness, recognize it, and consciously choose to change.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, just wow, first of all, because there's so much in what you've just described, to kind of to unpack, and a couple of things I wanted to pull out. One, I just wanted to make clear for all of our parents and caregivers that might be listening out there that what we're talking about is kind of these prolonged experiences that can
Oh my gosh,
create
yes. Thank you
negativity,
for
right?
saying that. It's not the one time. No,
Right.
no,
We're
no. I
we're all
really
real,
appreciate
right?
you saying that. Yes. Oh my gosh, yes. Infants and children are very resilient. Parents
Hmm.
always mess up. and kids turn out just fine. Yes, thank
Yeah,
you very
yeah.
much. I think we're more talking about, let's say, for example, a child who perhaps is raised, I don't know, let's talk about something extreme in an orphanage where no one speaks to
Hmm.
them, right? Like,
Hmm.
yes, we're talking about extremes. Thank you so much for bringing that up.
That no, all good, all good. I just for me as a fairly new parent still, I have a 2.5 year old. It's so hard to decipher like what this person says this and this person says this, and so you're always trying to balance it. And so I like to just highlight that for any caregivers listening out there that
Yeah,
are suddenly thinking, oh my goodness, I didn't smile at my baby today. But
right.
but to bring a point to what you
But
talked about
before
then,
you go
yes, go
on,
ahead.
may I add something?
Yes, of course.
Attunement to your child
Hmm.
also means being attuned to when you regret something or when you feel like you messed up, and being able to repair that is so healthy.
Mm.
So if, let's say, your 2-year-old comes to you and wants something to eat and you snap at them because you're in the middle of something, and then later you say, "Oh my gosh, I realized I snapped at you earlier and I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that. I was just in the middle of something." Like, then you've repaired it, and that's just as
Hmm.
good apparently for development as if you, let's say, did it finger quotes right the first time. So repair is really important too, and
Yeah.
I just, yes, please go on.
No, no, we completely agree with you. That is something that we promote profusely in the work that we do with our kids and families. But I was thinking about something you mentioned earlier, and you said, I'm going to get the words wrong. I won't say it exactly, but we call it smiling with your eyes, right? And um, really that impact of if a child consistently sees that smiling all the way to your eyes, or if it's kind of just a half smile and, for whatever reason, the caregiver isn't able to be fully emotionally responsive. And we see so much of that in our older kiddos who are very hypervigilant to those micro expressions that people are giving. And I truly believe like it begins here. It really begins here. And not only that, you remind me of when you're talking about the anthropology, and we've talked also about in our work, in our organization, when we're holding a baby and a dog starts barking at us really loudly, right? What do? We tense up. And so the baby, right in that moment, gets that feedback of, oh, that was a loud noise. Oh, I need to tense up and I feel it. And so I think about when we're thinking about food, our faces, like when we're trying food and we maybe go, ooh, and our baby sees that. And so they think, oh, I don't know if I should even put this near my mouth. And I don't know, that just made me think about that.
Well, I think there's a lot of situations where kids really admire parents. And so if we find, in the nutrition aspect, and probably you do this too, where if someone says, like, "Oh yeah, I don't eat cooked vegetables because my dad and I, we don't like cooked vegetables." It's a way of identifying. I mean, that was an example from my
Mhm.
real life. I didn't use me, but I love cooked vegetables. But I didn't know that when I was a kid because my dad never ate cooked vegetables, and I was like my dad. I didn't like cooked vegetables, and here I am, right? And I like cooked vegetables just fine. So yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. We're role models for our kids, and so they are learning from us. Absolutely.
And then I wanted to bring an experience that came into my mind as we're thinking about this being cared for and loved, and food being a tool for that connection. And actually, I just mentioned to you before we got on here about our conference that we have a chef coming, and he's been a previous guest on the podcast. And he talks about, food being this kind of tool for connection. And so one of my favorite memories of being a young child when it was probably like a kindergarten or first grade class in the UK. And we would get milk at break time. So in the morning, we would always get like a cold carton of milk to drink. And it's just one of my favorite memories. And you know what's so funny now is I don't drink milk. I had a bad experience one time, and now I find it very hard to drink. But looking back as a child, that connection with my peers, with the teacher taking care of us, oh my goodness, so special.
Yeah, it's so much more than the molecules. You totally get it.
So, um, let me look at my questions because we were having such a good conversation. So, tell me about when we were kind of preparing for our discussion today. You reframed words eating disorders. Tell our listeners a little bit about how you reframe that terminology
Sure,
and kind of how that helps in the role of healing.
sure. So part of anthropology is linguistics, how we use words, how our use of words has developed. And I feel like eating disorders is a great example of that. The phrase eating disorders, it's just two words, but it's developed into a phrase that means very specific things to us in this culture. And so, by this culture, I mean like Western culture. I can't say how
Mhm.
the words eating disorders are used in other cultures simply because this is the culture I live in and understand the best. But eating disorders, to many people hearing this, we think of these very specific sort of avatars or personas. Maybe the extremely underweight, emaciated woman.
Mhm.
I hate to like even mention that because I don't want to ingrain the stereotypes, but it's so significant that there's even an acronym for it in the field, which is SWAGS, skinny white adolescent girl, right? So
Mhm.
that's what people picture, either that or maybe another kind of eating disorder, but we get these very specific ideas in our mind of what someone with an eating disorder looks like, what behaviors they engage in, other demographics about them. And the fact is, and this is what I've observed from the very beginning of my career, is that anyone who eats can have an eating problem. Eating disorders is a diagnosis. It's a very specific DSM diagnosis. And there are many people who have eating dysfunction who may not meet the criteria for that diagnosis. So, put together both the diagnostic criteria and the sort of cultural image we have of someone with an eating disorder, and you end up with a lot of people with eating problems that I would call an eating disorder, finger quotes, that don't actually get observed, noticed, recognized as a problem, treated, offered help, etc. So I have chosen very consciously to not use those words. Granted, I mean, the books I wrote may have the words eating disorder in the title, but the goal is to say anyone who eats can have an eating problem, and it doesn't have to rise to the level of being a diagnosable eating disorder for that person to warrant or deserve or seek help. And so I
Mhm.
use the term dysfunctional eating behaviors or disruptive eating behaviors, or depending on the audience, problem eating behaviors, simply to say doesn't have to reach a level at all. It can just simply be not congruent with your goals, not congruent
Mhm.
with your intentions. That alone is enough reason to look into it, to investigate, to speak with a counselor about it, to try to determine what is the root of it, how to make a change. And so I think of dysfunctional eating behaviors as much more of a fluid term. It doesn't specify which behavior. So remember, if you are a professional, you're very familiar with the DSM, you know that the eating disorder diagnoses are divided based on what kind of behavior someone engages in. Do you not eat enough to sustain life? Do you eat and then use compensatory measures? There are people who do all of those things
Mhm.
in the course of one day. So they don't meet
Mhm.
any criteria, but they're very much dysfunctional eating behaviors. Dysfunctional eating behaviors also encompasses things that are not actually, finger quotes again, eating behaviors, but are eating related behaviors. So if someone were to over exercise because they felt they ate something wrong, if someone were to self harm because of how guilty they felt about eating something or not eating something, to me, self harm is not necessarily an eating behavior, but if it is because of someone's experience of eating, to me, it's an eating related behavior. And that, to me, can be encompassed in dysfunctional eating behaviors in a way that it can't be encompassed into eating disorders. And
Mhm.
so that is the framework I use. And then we talk about a spectrum of dysfunctional eating behaviors where you might have some dysfunctional eating behaviors, but if they're not impairing you on a functional level, if it makes no difference at all, if I'm just thinking about a birthday party I attended. Maybe I wasn't actually hungry for fuel, but maybe I ate birthday cake anyway. You could say, oh, there's a dysfunctional eating behavior because it wasn't necessarily attuned to my interoceptive feelings of hunger. but it's not impairing my functioning in any way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Another person could eat birthday cake at a party because they felt compelled. They didn't really want it, but they felt like a terrible friend if they didn't eat birthday cake. And then later, there's a compensatory behavior like induced vomiting or fasting or something
Mm-hmm.
like that. So the same behavior can now be dysfunctional for one person and perfectly normal for someone else. So it allows for that oh my gosh, I can't think of the word, that nuance. And it also allows for the spectrum of, is this dysfunctional eating behavior no big deal, neutral to your life? Is this dysfunctional eating behavior detrimental to your life and goals? Or is this eating behavior threatening your life? And
Mm-hmm.
so it gives us so much more latitude to talk about behaviors and eating and thoughts and feelings. And so that is why I purposefully, consciously choose dysfunctional eating behaviors when I speak, when I write, when I talk to
Mm-hmm.
someone like you, because I feel like it helps us really embrace a lot more than those limited words eating disorders.
I think that the biggest piece for me from what you just said is really that, well, one, that it allows that conversation, but it really allows us to look beyond just the food and the behavior, right? It's what's really driving this food related behavior.
Yeah.
Because
Motive is so important. Motive is
right.
crucial. Yes.
Well, and you've said it a couple of times, right? It's not just about the molecules. It's not, and that's certainly what we find in our work with kids and adolescents is, a lot of the time it's not about the food itself. We see a child who has food insecurity, who's hoarding food, and it's not about they need to eat the food. It's that they need to see that the food is still there. And
Yep.
so we don't hide it. We put it right here so that they can see it for when it's time to have the food, right?
Yep.
Um,
Oh, yeah. Boundaries. We haven't even talked about boundaries yet. There's so much about food that's boundaries. I'm thinking of a child that came into my office and told me he was allergic to hamburgers. And when I, delved more into it, it turns out that he just doesn't like hamburgers. But that wasn't enough of a boundary in his family to just say, no, I don't like it. He was still forced to
mm,
eat it. But if he said, I'm allergic to it, somehow that carried more weight. So he was
mm,
learning to actually make things up in order to protect his own boundary. That's not a good way to go through life. And so you could say here it is a kid that doesn't want to eat a hamburger, but really, this is something that is far beyond my scope as a dietitian. This is maybe a family therapy issue, right? But it
mhm,
came out in the food world.
mm. Yeah, like I just, as you were talking about that in my mind, I started like peeling back the layers. Like, so, he's setting a boundary, but why does he even need to set a boundary? Because there's this fear of a loss of connection, because that's obviously happened in the past. And then where is that? What's driving that behavior in the parent and so on?
Oh, yeah. And when you talk
Fascinating.
about the parents, I mean, that's my favorite is to look, one or two generations back and say, where is the source of this? And there's no blame, no shame at all, because I believe that, and I know there are exceptions and there are abusive situations, but I believe that barring that, most parents are doing their best and do things out of
Hmm.
love, do things because they want to protect their kids from things that they experienced and so on. And yet, we still accidentally can cause problems. And I think of it as just intergenerational traditions almost being passed
Hmm.
on, and they're no longer useful. And so when we look at it that way, it becomes okay to do it differently without feeling like we're betraying those previous generations. But yeah,
Hmm.
there's so much about what you're saying that I'm connecting with. I feel like we both are doing very similar work from different fields, and that's why I really, really want most or all of my patients to have a therapist, because sometimes we uncover something that has to do, or we start with food and then we uncover something that really isn't about food at all, and
Hmm.
needs to be addressed in a different sphere.
So let's shift gears just a little bit, because I want the listeners to hear a bit about in our previous conversation as we were preparing, you talked about there being like a lot of paths to an eating
Yes.
disorder or dysfunctional eating behaviors, and we're kind of talking about it a bit here. So, you had told me about like there was kind of four major paths. Will you share just a
Yeah.
little bit about that?
I'm happy to, with the caveat, of course, that every person with eating behavior has come to their own eating behavior universe in a different path. But over the 26 years I've been a dietitian, I've sort of whittled it down to four major sort of groupings because I felt like the field was really missing the origins. The field looks at an eating disorder based on what are the outcome behaviors as opposed to how did we get here. And so what I
Hmm.
observed is that anyone who, let's say, is not eating enough to sustain life got the same treatment when really there were lots of different things going on. So that's why I came up with this origins of dysfunctional eating behaviors model. And the four paths are very separate, but at the same time, people can have more than one and they interact. So the first category is biology based. So that includes things, anything to me that is, it can be environmental biological, like a concussion, but it can also be something organic like anxiety or depression. It can also be something specifically related to food, a diagnosis of celiac disease, food allergies,
Hmm.
diabetes, hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism, something that affects someone's relationship with food. And if that person were to, let's say, enter a treatment center because they're not eating enough to sustain life and get that kind of therapy, without the underlying issue, the physical issue ever being addressed, it's never going to solve anything, right?
Hmm.
So there's medication impact, there's ADHD, all of these things that impact someone's ability to nourish themselves. We have to look at what is the biological aspect of it before and solve it or treat it before that person can necessarily make changes voluntarily. The second group is addiction related dysfunctional eating behaviors. We know addiction has a biological component, certainly, but I felt like the addiction aspect of eating was different enough to need its own category. And we could just have like a 3-day workshop just on that. But the
Hmm.
bottom line is simply that there are connections between the way we conceptualize addictions and the way sometimes we experience food. The third path is stress and trauma related. And my definitions of stress and trauma may be different from someone else's, but I think of stress as like an ongoing chronic stress and trauma as individual events. And at the same time, I feel like ongoing stress is traumatic. And so in that category includes terrible incidents that happen, whether that's individual or community wide, like a natural disaster. It also includes ongoing stress, which can be in the home, family related stress. It can include things like institutionalized racism, food insecurity. There's all kinds of stressors that impact, first of all, brain chemistry, and anything
Hmm.
that affects brain chemistry can then affect us either appetite wise or our use of food or not eating to modulate our own brain chemistry. And we often don't think of food as a mood altering chemical, but it certainly is. And then the fourth category is our environment and our learned behavior. So that is diet culture and appearance culture and wellness culture. And ladies don't eat dessert or whatever other messages that we've sort of grown up with and inherited in our lives. That's the one we actually talk the most about in Healing Your Inner Eater, because even if you don't have a medical problem, an addiction, or a major stress or trauma in your life, you grew up in the swimming pool, swimming in the pool of diet culture. And so we all carry some of that, even if we have one or none of the other pathways.
Hmm. I really appreciate those definitions and kind of classifications or the way that you've categorized them. Again, I think it allows more room for conversation.
Yeah. And let me
And
say
just
that it's not just an academic exercise. To me, the whole purpose of looking at it is so that we know how to help. Because if
mhm,
it is a biological root, we need to get that situation addressed. If it's an addiction, we need to get that situation addressed. If it's stress and trauma related, we need to get that situation addressed. And I think I pay special attention to the stress and trauma section because that's where I sort of have a beef with society saying, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's about willpower, etc. And when there's so many environmental factors that cause stress, you're saying to someone, use willpower in a situation where willpower is like a drop in a tiny bucket. And so I
Hmm.
feel like that to me, it's about solving the root problems. If you don't have enough to eat, I, all the therapy in the world can't help you with your eating
Hmm.
disorder, right? So that's where I feel like I just want to clarify it's not just for fun, it's that we actually use the origins to determine how to then best help someone.
Hmm. Hmm. I'm really thinking about your comments then about, society, and I think I'm very much interested in the attachment side of it, but for me, what's also so neat is really thinking about the societal, the cultural aspects that play into all of this, and how, I think at the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned that you think that you wake up in the morning, you choose what you're gonna eat, and you're gonna choose it, but there are so many other factors that play a part in that. And I think about how my own food choices have changed throughout my life. Um, and it's so fascinating to me. But I want to touch on, I'd like to talk a little bit about the cultural piece, because
Sure.
I've been very lucky to be able to travel quite a bit around the world and see other cultures, and particularly the African culture. I have had the privilege of being able to experience, and I had this wonderful experience of visiting a local village where they were cooking through the whole day. And come the evening, it was time to eat, and it was so interesting to me that we didn't have plates. We used like big leaves for plates. There's no silverware or anything like that, so we used our hands. It was very dark, so we couldn't even see what we were eating. And I just found it. I mean, I live for those kinds of experiences, but I also know that other people out there are probably listening thinking, "Oh my goodness, I could never do that. What was I being fed?" Um, but what really stood out to me was the community, like that it took, and not to be stereotypical, but it was the women cooking. And it was a big group of them. It was like this family, and then everyone comes together to eat. And the connection piece, I think, is what I think about so much. That we lack so much in Western culture, this connection. I think we used to have it, but it's rapidly gone away. I don't know, just thought that was my thoughts right now.
I love it. And I love that we have opportunities for connection. I think we don't often take advantage of them as much as we could because we don't realize other people are craving those connections too.
Mm,
Like how much would, other friends want to come over and do something together? And I like that. And I think it's we have to make those things on purpose. And I'm thinking of my friend who teaches her business is called Board Mama. She's a dietitian and she makes charcuterie boards, also candy boards and barcuterie boards for dogs. I mean, all kinds of things. So charcuterie, not just in the sense of like meat, right?
hmm.
It's come to mean lots of different things. But she teaches charcuterie board making classes. And people go crazy for these classes. They love them so
Hmm.
much. And I can't help wondering if some of it is not the community aspect of it, right?
Yep.
Getting a book about charcuterie boards and doing it in your own home wouldn't be nearly as enjoyable as doing it with a group of others who are experiencing the same thing and learning the same techniques. And maybe that's part of why cooking classes are so popular too. But I think we know somehow some part of us knows we need that, and yet
Hmm.
we don't have the language maybe or the opportunities as much. We sort of save those things for like Thanksgiving or specific holidays, and then we kind of make ourselves overwhelmed with it, whereas it would be so much nicer if it was part of our regular experience. And any
Hmm.
parents who are listening, as a dietitian, I believe one of the very best ways to help your kids have a well-rounded experience with food is to involve them in age appropriate
Hmm.
ways in food preparation. because there are such good warm feelings about it. And I'm thinking about the triplets in my family who are 4.5, and they come over 2 days a week. I pick them up from school, and one day we made breakfast for dinner. And I remember Violet, so 4.5, what's age appropriate here? She whisked the eggs together. But when they got to the table, she said, I made the scrambled eggs. It was beautiful to see her ownership of it, right? To me, I kind of feel like the making of it is the cooking of it, but that's not appropriate at her age. But to
Uh-huh.
her,
Uh-huh.
she was involved. She was invested in those scrambled eggs. She
Yep.
loved them. They tasted great. She had the joy of seeing other people eat her creation, right? And all she
Mm-hmm.
did was whisk the eggs together. She didn't even
Uh-huh.
crack them, right? And so that's just a tiny example of the big, I mean, how wonderful that you had that experience. I love that community coming together to cook. We need to try, even in our smallest ways, to
Mm-hmm.
create that for ourselves, because what greater act is there of making food for someone, feeding
Mm-hmm.
someone? It's
Mm-hmm.
literally nourishing someone, but it's nourishing them with more than molecules.
Right. I love your example because you have me thinking again, it's not just the molecules. She cooked the scrambled eggs and she was taking care of somebody. And because of her own experiences of being cared for and having that innate feeling of this feels good, like someone loves me enough to take care of me.
Hmm.
Now I'm going to transfer that and give that to somebody else.
Yes.
It's this cycle of attachment. Like it really
Yes.
is.
And I want to make sure to say the two boy triplets, Luca and Liam, are also involved in the kitchen as well. They cut with plastic knives, they cut the strawberries and grapes and made the fruit salad. And then when they were done and there wasn't anything left to do, I invited them to decorate the table. And we had a beautiful dinner with all the puppies and kitties, little figurines and pom poms, and it was the most creative table I've ever seen. So I just want to make sure I don't make it sound like only the female was
Mhm.
involved in the preparation of the meal. Not reinforcing stereotypes here.
Oh, no, 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 we know. Um, oh my goodness, Jessica, this has just been such a great conversation. I my mind is just in 100 different places right now. And I hope that my listeners' minds are going in all those different directions too. I'd love for us to, I'm going to just throw this out here right now and surprise you a bit, but I would love to think about another episode that we could do talking about how do we bring food into perhaps the healing journey. We do a lot of work in our world where we encourage feeding experiences from the caregiver to the child, even our older kids, because we want to recreate an experience that should be nurturing and loving and kind. And so maybe down the line we can think about another episode, but today has just been wonderful. I'm so grateful for your insight and just knowledge in this area and bringing it to us. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. And I really love knowing that there's a whole community of people working on this in their spheres and hopefully reaching some of them. And just, I can't encourage you enough. It's so important and crucial to keep helping because there's so much harm that happens in those early feeding experiences when they are consistent and
Hmm.
prolonged, not the one-offs. But it's really something that I hope, and I can't guarantee this, but there is a lot of healing that is possible and repair, even for someone who is an adult now. It's
Hmm.
just a matter of really recognizing, sort of rewrite it. So anyway, there's always hope. It's never too late.
Awesome. Thanks, Jessica.